This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
They say you can tell a lot about a person by the contents of their freezer. So, what does a bottle of Jägermeister say? It says you have standards, you don't cut corners, and you like your Jägermeister shots the way they're meant to be enjoyed, ice cold. As for the frozen taquitos and mystery leftovers, we'll keep that between us. Drink it cold, or don't drink it at all. Jägermeister. Damn, that's cold. Drink responsibly. Jägermeister liqueur, 35% alcohol by volume. Imported by Mast Jägermeister, U.S. White Plains, New York.
And we're back with me, Johnny McMurray, on the On the Spot Football Podcast for yet another fantastic guest. Tonight's guest is a man who has been in multiple positions at Glentoran Football Club, and as you can see, he joins a long list of people who have wrote books in the Irish League. That follows Sir Jackie Fullerton, and if you want to count Matty Tipton's coaching book, you can count it. But I'm joined tonight by Ian Clarke.
Chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more, can make me feel like a spectator in my own life.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It's the #1 prescribed branded chronic migraine preventive treatment.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com, or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
Ian?
Hi Johnny, how are you?
I'm very good, sir. How are you?
Not bad, thanks for the invitation.
No problem. Thank you for coming. We've had a couple of nice, honest conversations, and
yep.
As you say, I mean, it's not many people are an author and they come on and they've had probably an illustrious career in higher management in the football club as to what you have, but talk to me, what was that like, your lifespan at Glens, being a fan, moving into the club, writing a book?
Well, funny, Johnny, I started going to the Glens. My dad took me when I was 7, right? My first Glen game was down at Clondyboy Park. We beat Bangor 6-0. It was actually August 69, so it was a month the troops actually came in. So, it was a strange month. So he took me to that. My first time at the Oval was the following month. We played Arsenal and beat them in the UEFA Cup.
So is that your first game?
That was my first game at the Oval, yeah. And that was me. That was me. I thought it was going to be like that all the time. A 6-0 then beating Arsenal. I finished up being an Arsenal supporter after that as well. But, so I did that and I followed them from then on, right? And apart from 13, 14 years I had living in Scotland and England, was working across the way, I have always supported them. And my involvement in the club came unexpectedly. I was approached in 2013, which is round about the year we'd won the cup. But that summer we lost nearly a whole team, Andy Waterworth, Jimmy Callagher, absolute quality, John Ward, quality players, we'd lost. And they asked me to come in to handle the media. Now, compared to now, that was a hell of a difficult time to handle media at Glentoran, and because I'd worked in newspapers both here and across the water, the vice chairman at the time, Stephen Henderson, he took me up to the board to meet them, and so I agreed to help them out. And then the first story I had to actually deal with was actually about Jimmy Callagher leaving the club, and Jimmy at the time was a bloke. At the time he was my favourite player at Glentoran. He was a super player for us, But and then after a couple of years, again, not long after we won the cup again under Eddie Patterson, I was asked to go on the board, and the first thing I had to deal with there as media officer on the board was Eddie Patterson's sacking. I think 4 months after he won the Irish Cup for the second time, which looking back, with hindsight, I think all of us would say that was a mistake.
Absolutely,
100% mistake. But that first period when I was media officer and then director, that took us right up to the takeover, and Ali came in, Ali and Mick and Wendy came in 2019. And during that period, we had one point, the locks on the door at the gates at the Oval were literally closed. And it's all detailed in there, by a vulture fund, really, basically. We'd had a debt, and one of the major banks here in Northern Ireland had sold that debt onto a vulture fund, and within days they had locked the gates. We didn't have the money to pay them back. So we were able to do that. That old board, basically, that was there at the time was able to do that. And then a year or so later, Ali came in, and obviously things changed. The financial pressures were eased off the club quite dramatically, but the pressure then was to deliver on the pitch with the money that was being spent. So I was on the board for another 3 years after the takeover, and a couple of those years I was general manager. Mick and Wendy brought me in as general manager at that point. And really I went in, I'd retired early for health reasons from newspapers, and I went in, did a couple of years with them just to help them settle in. It was the COVID era, won the cup, we qualified for Europe a couple of times, but really we were managing a club where there was no income because of COVID. Like, every club was in that position, length and breadth of Europe, basically. But for a club like the Glens, that's tough enough. And I have to say, if Ali Poor hadn't have bought the club by then, God knows how that would have treated it that way. We ended up for the Glens, so we're very lucky. The timing isn't always great for the Glens, but that was perfect, that stage. Yeah. So I did that, and then finished on the board in 2022, and as general manager, quit. I just basically had enough. I'd done it long enough, really, And not long after that, I got diagnosed with cancer, and it's away now. But I sort of thought, right, I'm going to have to do something here. I'm going to have to do something that's going to occupy my time and take my mind off that. And that's really where the book came from.
Okay. So the book stems from one of your toughest times.
Yes, absolutely. And it was basically, Johnny, it's the strangest decade. It's 2 decades, 25 years this deals with, really, from the summer of 2000 until the summer of 2025. Now, I thought when I started writing it, it was probably late 2024. I'd done all my research, my historical research and that. And I sort of thought to myself, right, it'd be really nice if this could be sort of bookended. We won the cup at the very start of it. And then if we won the cup, which I thought we might do that season, that would be a nice tail end. Mm-hmm. But that's where the title nearly comes in. Yeah. Everything's nearly about the Glens, and has been my whole life. And the first decade was a decade, firstly under Roy Coyle, but then three other managers as well, where the Glens won a trophy virtually every season, at least one trophy virtually every season. They qualified for Europe every season. They were in the top 2 or 3, or not just the top 2, every season. But that decade really ended about the time I came back. In February 2011, we moved back. And at that very point, the Glens basically very nearly went bust. And exceptional debts. HMRC had threatened to close the doors at that stage on them, and had posted a winding up order. Some of our supporters do an organisation called the Glentoran Community Trust. They got together. They managed to lobby the First Minister at the time, Peter Robinson. He came up with a still, as yet, unnamed benefactor who gave the club the best part of $500,000 to get them out of that trouble. Right. So it got them out of trouble. The club didn't close. But what it meant really was, Johnny, for the next 8 years until Ali Poor came in, the club was constantly trying to sort of stay afloat and stay competitive. And frankly, apart from a couple of Irish Cups under Eddie Patterson, we didn't stay competitive. So I knew everything there was to know really from 2013 on, but I wanted to find out the first decade while I was away. I really didn't know how we got ourselves into that position. The consensus was that we ran a massive debt during that decade. And the 2 chairmen who ran the club at different points in that decade, they were the 2 names that were held up as being responsible for everything that went wrong.
And who was that?
That was Stafford Reynolds and Aubrey Ralph, right?
Okay.
Now, I then basically, when I started researching it, I thought the same thing. I thought it was Stafford and Aubrey, right? But when I started researching it, the first thing I found, really almost in the second or third page of the book, was Roy Coyle announcing in the summer of 2000, they just won the Irish Cup. He announced that he was going to have to transfer list quite a few players. He was going to have to, get maybe 100 or 200,000 off the wage bill, because a club at that point was carrying debts of 900,000. Now, neither of those 2 guys had gone on the board yet.
Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't them. So I then thought, right, that completely changes the story. We need a new narrative here, basically. We need to handle that narrative right. So I thought, right, I'm going to have to speak to a lot of people from that decade. Now, of the people in that decade who were important, Roy Coyle was manager for the first 5 or 6 years of that decade. Phenomenally successful period, as well as Roy's whole career was. Roy hasn't been in the best of health, so he wasn't really going to be able to speak to me about that. But I got a few boys. I got Darren Lockhart and Colin Nixon, who were both regular members of that team. They were very honest and very frank with me about what went on there. But after Coyle, Wendy Miller came in as manager. Now, Wendy's obviously down there now as director of football. So, again, Wendy's era as manager, he lasted, I think, basically 13 or 15 months or thereabouts. Now, I got a bit of criticism somewhere recently for making him look like somebody says, a half-decent manager, right? But I wasn't there during Wendy's period, so I have no real knowledge of it.
Yeah.
What I do know now, and I mentioned this to Andy Matheson, was Wendy's deputy at the time and, a Glentoran legend in his own right, that when he got the job, I think, around about St. Valentine's Day, 2016, right? They didn't lose a league game until January 2017. Yeah, that's right. And that's phenomenal when you think about it, But they had one really howler of a month, and that was January 2017. And they were well ahead in the league over Linfield. They lost in January. They drew at Windsor in Boxing Day in a game they should have won. Lost in January, and then imploded for that month, and then didn't win the league, and Wendy was away by the end of the season. Now, the one thing that runs through this book is nearly every season, there was 1 month, right up until this year, where the Glens lost a match unexpectedly, and then imploded for about 5 or 6 weeks. And that defined their season. They could be brilliant either side of it, right? But they would implode. And the thing is, there must be something in the DNA of Glentoran that does that, because they're so under different managers, even under Coyle. That happened. So after Coyle, Wendy came in, then Alan MacDonald was manager, the last manager to win the league for the Glens. Now, again, I wasn't going to the matches when Alan was there, but I know that certainly people close to him, would put the stress and the strain that job was put him under as a reason for his health collapsing, and then obviously his tragic passing in 2010, or 2011. But because Alan obviously wasn't there, I wanted to speak to somebody about that. So Nicky was still there. George Neal, who had played about 500 games for the Glens, George was Alan's assistant the whole way through that. Scott Young, was the coach the whole way through that. So I really got to the grips to what was going on under Big Alan's period, because Alan won the league, right? And then a whole summer, there was a question mark about whether he'd stay or not. And I remember from a distance reading it in Irish League forums and talking to some of my mates who were still over here. And I remember there was no great appetite for keeping Big Alan on among the support, despite the fact they had won the league. Now, he had 2 full seasons. The first season, I think we were 2 points behind the Blues. The second season, we won the league. So that's not bad.
No, definitely not.
By anybody's reckoning, But he was never popular. Some people put it down to the style of play. I don't know, because I wasn't here. But I wanted to get that story of George and Colin. They gave me that. It was great. Then when on went, Scott Young, who'd been one of his coaches, Scott, who'd obviously been a top player for the Glens over the years. Scott was only 32. He became manager, I suppose, basically in the middle of the 2009-2010 season, like less than a year after Alan had won the league, with the Glens. And Scott was the first one to really feel the pinch of the pressure being put on him to reduce the wage bill and get rid of a lot of important players, which he did. But he was a very inexperienced guy doing it. Yeah. And he basically gave me one of the most brutally honest and moving interviews I've ever heard for this book. And we had a launch night. Scott was on the platform that night, and the guy was absolutely superb, absolutely loves the Glens. But like Alan MacDonald, who hadn't previously been a Glenman, it broke him to a large degree, And you're talking about good people here with a lot of commitment. So Scott resigned after we lost in the league to Newington, in the Cup, Newington in early 2012. Now, Scott, at that stage, Newington were an amateur league team. They hadn't got the level they're at now, where they have the Donnelly brothers and people like that playing for them. So they lost that. Scott resigned, and then Eddie Patterson came in. Now, Eddie won the league and won the Cup, the second season. His first full season, he won the Cup and got us into Europe, which was obviously vital financially, because the good money was just starting to come through then in Europe. Like, all the years we'd won, we got the Europe in the first part of the century. There's no money in it. It wasn't. You're probably costing you money to a certain degree, Eddie got us into Europe, but then he lost Jimmy Callagher, Andy Waterworth, Sean Ward, Richard Clarke, Stephen Carson. All like top level players. And like out of those ones, Clarke, Callagher, Ward, and Waterworth went on to win the league and cup more than once. I mean, with the Blues, Crusaders, whoever, So, those were players who fitted into better teams than us. Eddie lost them. The following season, basically, he was able to bring Curtis Allen in. He got Jordan Stewart into the team. He was bringing through a few other players like, the guys now, Danny Gibson, was Danny McKee then, Kim Nelson. He was bringing good young players in, Willie Garrett, Callum Burney, people like that, and Marcus Keane, obviously. So, we won the league under Eddie. In 2015, which nobody had the cup. Sorry, it keeps in the league. That's just
you're still hoping.
That's Freudian for a Glen man. It is still hope. But we won the cup again. Like that's the cup 2 years out of 3.
Yeah,
with a much lesser team. The second time, So Eddie did that, and then had a iffy start to the league. Nothing catastrophic, but there was still this feeling around the Glens. We should be doing better than this now. Given the financial situation we're in, and by the way, I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Given the financial situation we were in, there was no logic that dictated the Glens should be doing better than this. None whatsoever, So Eddie then bit the dust. And that was just around about the time I joined the board. I think everybody regrets the Eddie situation because I think with the benefit of hindsight, most of us know that.
Well, what was the main reasoning behind this? Because if you've just won the league not the league, obviously you still won the league, but if you've won the cup 2 out of 3 years, what gives somebody the right to, if it was inconsistent performances for a long period of time, I would say absolutely Eddie deserves to go, but at the same time, it didn't seem like it was even close to that.
It's very hard to rationalise it, right? The Saturday, we played up at Windsor, and we were a goal down for most of the match, then Curtis Allen equalised in the last minute, so it's part of a feel-good thing then. Mm-hmm. Then we were down to play Carrick twice. We played them on the Tuesday night. I think it was in the County Antrim Shield or the League Cup. It was in something, or we beat them. We played them on the Saturday and beat them. Now, Eddie was called down, and he really was in the detail on this in the book. Eddie was then called down to meet the chairman and the vice chairman, who then told him he was sacked, right? Now, he blames the chairman. Eddie's very strong about that he blames his relationship with the chairman was a problem. I didn't, have to be honest with you, in support of both Eddie and the chairman. I didn't sense that at the time. And when memory goes back to it, I still don't sense it. There's nothing I particularly missed in board meetings that would have suggested that. But that's how Eddie recalls it. And from his point of view, that's important. It's important to know how Eddie recalls it.
Who was the chairman at this
Stephen
stage?
Henderson. Stephen had just taken over as chairman about a year or so before. And then he was the one that invited me to be media officer. And then he invited me onto the board. And Stephen was chairman through probably one of the worst periods in the club's history. Okay. And it wasn't down to him. But it was the worst period. He became chairman in about 2014, 3 years after Peter Robinson had saved this. But the club was on his horse, frankly.
Yeah.
He stayed chairman for 2 or 3 years after the 3 years thing, after the takeover. But at that stage, it was very much a front of house role. It wasn't really a chairmanship with any authority because Mick and Wendy and Ali and the finance director were in by that stage. So I think Eddie would put that down to that. And I have to take that at face value, but it was a mistake, right? I think what Eddie was told was that they expected us to perform better in the league. That's where the Glens should be measured. But when I look back at what Eddie was doing, like when Eddie got the sack, he had just lost Jordan Stewart to Swindon Town. Now, for 2 seasons, the 2013-14 season, 14-15 season, to be perfectly honest with you, Jordan Stewart was the only reason to pay in the West Glens.
Yeah, he was amazing.
He was incredible. Mm-hmm. He was the only reason to pay in, and everybody remembered that, which is why the transfer back to the Glens was easier for Jordan.
Yeah.
Than it would have been for some other people, But he lost Jordan. Now, when you lose a player like that, and you're not going to replace him with a player of the same quality, because I think we got something like 50 grand for Jordan, because when a player wanted to go in those days, you hadn't really had much option but to do it, Yeah. So we didn't get much for Jordan. So Eddie then went, and then from then on, we were in this situation where I think for the next 5 seasons, the manager that started the season, the season, didn't finish it. And that happened a lot at the Glens, and that's what's come out to me. I can't really comment on the ones that came before, but I think Roy Coyle, I think this is right, Roy Coyle, Paul Miller, Alan MacDonald, Scott Young and Eddie Patterson were all out of the Glens during the next season while they were still holders of a trophy. Right? When Scott went, they were in the final of the League Cup. I think it was the Shield. So when he went, so he actually got them in the final when he walked. So I think, and I'm not blaming anybody for this at the club, I think there's just a level of expectation at Glentoran, and I go into some detail in this in the book with some things George Neal told me in particular. You know, there's an obsession down there, and we all have it a bit, with Linfield. You know, and at that stage, that was a great decade for the Glens. But as well as that, you're up against probably one of the greatest Linfield teams there's ever been. You know, Spike Ferguson, Peter Thompson, people like that, you know. I mean, you're up against a great Linfield team, and that tends to be what used to happen to us in the 80s. We had a phenomenal Glentoran team under Big Ronnie McFall and then Tommy Jackson. But Roy Coyle won the league nearly every year with the Blues. You know, and that's where we measure ourselves. And we're, even during the difficult years, we're still a wee bit this way. But I think it's important to say in defence of our supporters that you support a big club. That's your expectation, because it's what you've experienced in the past. You expect to keep winning things, and you can rationalise it and say, we've no money, we've no this, and everything. You rationalise that, but team basically 3 o'clock on a Saturday, and then when you're in the pub on Saturday night, any sense of rationale goes out the window. You've just seen the team lose to somebody that historically you wouldn't expect them to lose to. You know, you were finishing consistently behind the Crews, consistently behind the Reds, as well as the Blues. You know, so there was these top teams were leaving us way behind during that period, because we had absolutely no ability to raise funds for the club. And if you did raise funds and you were, you know, spending it in players, other creditors, you could be sure would be looking at that and thinking, here, what's going on down there? You know, you couldn't just do that, you know. So it was just an impossible period for the club, and an impossible period for the managers. Yeah. And one of the managers I refer to in there is Big Gary Haverin. Now, Gary came to us, he had one manager job before he got our job. He got Carrick Rangers promoted, and he won the league, the Steel and Sons Cup, and Intermediate Cup that season. So that's clean sweep, right? Treble, clean sweep, whatever you want to call it. He then the next season kept them up, now under very controversial terms, as you remember, who at one point then, I think, you know, but he kept them up under very controversial terms, but he kept them up, that's the point. Yeah, he does. Then he quit, and he came to us about 3 or 4 months later. Now, you know, we brought Gary in. He gave a very good interview. You know, there was other people in for the job at the time, but Gary gave a great interview, right? And
could you say who else was in for that job?
Well, Colin Nixon was in for it. And like Colin Nixon talks about that in the book as well. And Colin Nixon was absolutely idolised at the Oval.
I would say it'll be a perfect fit, probably.
He made a record number of appearances for the club, but at that stage he hadn't managed. You know, and this was an impossible club. Now, he had his supporters on the board, you know, but he hadn't managed anywhere, you know, and a young fella coming in with no managerial experience, you know, and Colin was only retired a couple of years at this stage, you know, so he didn't get it. But Big Gary came in, lasted about a year, but he came in and all of a sudden he's signing players from Carrick, from Ballyclare Comrades, from Warren Point, you know, John McGuigan, people like that, you know, and people are saying, why the hell is he signing players at that level? You're thinking, well, part of the reason he got the job is he knows players at that level. Yeah. And that's the level of players we can afford to sign. Yeah. At the minute. It's as simple as that, you know. And like, you look at Gary, you know, what he's achieved now at Larne. Okay, it's a few years on, he's got a bit more experience now, but, you know, he's done a hell of a job at Larne. Absolutely. After what was a poor enough season for them last year.
But he's also done every job that possibly needed to get him to where he needed to be.
He worked his way right the whole way up.
He was a community officer, he's done everything at Larne. Yeah.
Well, he was very, you know, people were being quite dismissive of him. We were saying, some of us were saying, like, he won a treble. Yeah, look at the treble he won, though. Yeah, it was the level he was managing at that year. Yeah. You know, so, like, all you can do as a manager is win every so fight.
Position that they're in. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, it's like saying, I mean, not that I'm comparing the two, right? But when Ferguson went to Manchester United, people had said, he won a double, he won the league, but it's only in the Scottish League. Well, like, nobody would have said that about him. Yeah. You know, and Gary had won a league down from us. You know? So you have to accept sometimes.
Everybody has a starting position, don't they?
Yeah. And Gary just got the job, I think, as one of the chapters in here says, right man at the wrong time. And that specifically refers to Gary. Okay. Right, Gary in particular. He was the right man for the job. It was the wrong time for him. You know, and personally, okay, I can't be delighted for Larne won the league because we want to win it. Yeah. But I'm genuinely pleased for Gary. Yeah. Because I think he deserves the bit of success, you know. I was genuinely pleased for him.
Yeah. But in terms of guys coming in and you think about the inconsistencies that Glentoran have had at that period of time, so you're talking about managers coming in, managers not finishing the season, and managers going again. At what stage does Glentoran ever think that they're going to have success by doing that? Because if you're just going to chop and change and get rid of people,
yeah,
you've no hope in hell of winning a league. There's no consistency here.
Oh, look, wait a tell you, if we hadn't been taken over by Ali, okay, we've totally underachieved in the years since the takeover. But if we hadn't been taken over by Ali, God knows where it would be.
Yeah.
Because there was no sign of us getting ourselves out of trouble. Now, to be fair to that board and the chairman at that stage, we did do so much and got the debt down. By the time Ali came, the debt was pretty much away.
Okay.
There was so much had to be done, and it was done. But there was no money coming in to spend on players or anything like that, I mean, we even finished up at the end of it with Ronnie McFarlane for a year.
Yeah.
Now, Big Ronnie to me is, well, to everybody, Ronnie's a legend. And he probably, I would say, no disrespect to Jackie or Coyle or anybody, Ronnie McFall's my favourite Glentoran manager from his time in the 80s because of what he did for us, what he brought into the club. We brought Ronnie in, and I love talking to Ronnie. But he was bringing people in like, Connor Pepper came in and did well for us, John Hearn came in and did rightly for us. But Ronnie wasn't able to shop in the market that he shopped in. And as well as that, Ronnie never got enough credit for bringing young players through, which he did for us, Ron Manley, George Neal, people like that. And he did, and Alfie Stewart, and he did it for Portadown as well. Ronnie brought some very good young players through, but he always had good players around them. That was how he worked, and it worked really well for him. But Ronnie came into the Glens at a time when the Glens, after Gary, when Gary took over, we were on our knees. God knows what we were on whenever by the time Gary went, financially. Ronnie took over again at a time that was equally, impossible as Gary did. And, we basically, look, as a big club, we were finished. Now, we haven't got back there yet. We've got big crowds and everything like that, but we haven't got back there in terms of the winning that we need to do. But, we're back to being competitive now because of Ali's money, really, rather than anything else. But we're not, we were never going to get back there. You're right. When you think of all those managers, Eddie Patterson sacked 3 months after winning the cup, 4 months after winning the cup. Alan Kernahan lasted, I think, from October till August. Big Gary lasted from October until January a year later. Ronnie lasted for a year. These are not mugs.
No.
They're not mugs, these guys, but they came to an impossible club, John. It's as simple as that.
You have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
You thought this was your Run Club era. Turns out, it was more of a thinking about Run Club era. The good news? Someone's marathon training is about to start. Sell your workout gear on Depop. Just snap a few photos, and we'll take care of the rest. They get their race day fit, and you get a payout for trying. Someone on Depop wants what you've got. Start selling now. Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
In terms of like the overall stature of the club, we all understand how big of a club Glentoran is, and you've talked about the pressures and everything like that, but for a club to be that big, what was the total debt that they had at the time, and what really caused it?
It was one stage about 1.2 million.
And this is what, 2000, before 2000?
Oh, no. This is basically sort of at the worst stage, which was just probably right about the time when the benefactor came in. 2010, 11, 12.
Okay.
No, because the thing is, what I'm saying is that, Stafford and Aubrey, when they were chairman, didn't, and like say them, their board, was their chairman, but was their board agreed to do these things? They didn't stop spending money. One of the things that comes through there is basically every year Coyle would put 2 or 3 players in the transfer list, big earners. Then he would bring a couple of players in to replace them, and then not let them go. The original ones didn't go, So it was getting a bit like that, Okay. But again, see, in the same way that Gary Hayward and people like that were under pressure in the second decade of the century, these people were under pressure in the first decade. Like, we signed Gary Hamilton. I'm sure we made him the top paid player in the club. I've seen one report in the Sunday Life when he was leaving, when I was researching this. It claims Gary was in $1,000 a week.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he was or not, but they're claiming he was. But, would those boys have been given credit if they hadn't signed Gary and Gary gone to Windsor? They wouldn't. That's not how football works, Johnny.
Is that a competitive nature to say, give them the money, get them to come to us because we're Glentoran?
Exactly.
But let's put the club in financial ruin.
Exactly. That's what was happening. But there was always the feeling at that stage when he was starting to come into Europe, there was always, get a good run in Europe and we're all right. And people are still thinking like that.
Oh, but you're still part-time back then, regardless.
Oh, I were.
You know?
But I mean, even with the Europe thing, I remember the couple of years I was general manager in there, I handled all the European stuff with them. You know, and what people don't know, you'll probably know it, you know, as a player, you know, from Lauren days to the cruise, you know, there's a lot of costs go with that. An awful lot of costs go with that. You know, when you're talking about, okay, in those 2 years, we had to hire a flight both times. Now, the first year, UEFA paid for it, paid for everybody who had to hire a flight because they insisted that we all had to have private flights because of COVID, right? Okay. The second year, they still insisted on it, but didn't help the clubs out then. Now, we were sort of lucky in the sense that both times, the first year we're flying to Glasgow and back, the second year we're flying to Liverpool and back. But you're still talking a substantial amount of money. You're then talking about what you have to do in terms of medical tests to make up for UEFA wanted. And we hadn't been in Europe for a few years when Mick and his crowd won the cup. You know, so most of our players hadn't been tested the previous year, last 2 years, right? But most of our lads hadn't been tested, so we had to test all of them.
Yeah.
And that was thousands upon thousands of pounds to get that done. You know, so, and we only the first year we got through a round, so that was good. The second year we didn't get through a round. So you're not talking any significant profit then. The year we played in Malta when Rodney was manager and then when Fino came in to take over, you know, we wouldn't have, I wasn't doing it by that stage, but we can't have made much.
Yeah.
Going to Malta, you know, and then having to pay all that because, again, we hadn't been in Europe for 3 years at that, or 2 years at that stage.
Yeah.
So, you know, Europe's not the great medicine and a great lifesaver that people make it out to be unless you get through a round or two. Yeah. But at that stage, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I wasn't here, but I've spoken to Stafford, I've spoken to Aubrey, I've spoken to Nicky Leaper, George Neal, Scott Young, people like that, you know. And all those guys have said, like, the club was just speculating.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it didn't come off. You're gambling. It's as simple as that. But you're under pressure to deliver from the support. And like I said earlier, my first 4 years supporting the Glens was a kid. Won the league twice and won the cup once. And God knows what else. We won the Gold Cups, Ulster Cups, whatever, you know. But that's what most of us grew up with as Glen men. So that's what most of us expected. And when that stopped, somebody had to take the blame for that.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, all football supporters are very quick to throw out the blame. Look at Liverpool with Slot this season. I don't know how good Slot is. I'm an Arsenal man, right? But he won the league last year and now he's away. That's what we were doing.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of pressure David Healy seems to be under this year after winning the league last season.
Absolutely.
Similar sort of thing. You know, look at Healy's done for the Blues. Fantastic job there, you know. So, you know, the pressure that comes on our managers and our chairmen, they're just the natural pressure that comes with managing a big club or running a big club, you know, whose expectations are still high. You know, and that's why the pressure then came on the Mick. You know, when he became manager and after hadn't won the league after 2 or 3 years, the pressure then came on Mick for the same reasons. And I don't think that'll ever change, Johnny.
But what do you think should change? Because if you've now got the benefactor and Mick and Wendy have both been a massive influence in getting the money in.
Yeah.
They've obviously became managers. They were on the board. Mick's obviously left, but at what stage do you think that he was only there for 3 years? He was still quite successful, and you got back into Europe.
2 years,
starting to make money. Do you know what I mean? So he's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
What's the need for him to jump ship? You see, Arteta's been at Arsenal for 5-6 years now, and he's only finally got success now. Like, at what stage do you think going, maybe we need a longer term plan here?
That was one of the craziest seasons I can ever remember as a Glen man, right? We drew, I think it was 1 each for Larne on the first day of the season, down at Inver Park, right? So that, you know, that is no mean feat in this day and age, you know, draw Larne down there. We then didn't concede another goal until the start of November, or drop a point. You know, we went on a phenomenal run of form. I haven't as good a run of form as I've seen the Glens ever do. Now, Conor McManaman was on fire. Jay Donnelly was on fire. You know, you're talking great players here playing at their very best. You know, with plenty of other good players in the team as well. You know, Bobby Burns, people like that. It was a good team. Yeah. And then we went down to Warrenview one night. Went to goal up. It was in November, right? Went to goal up. We flew to Rory Donnelly. And then we got beat 3-1. There's a couple of questionable refereeing decisions, right? But we then didn't win another game while Mick was there, right through to January. You know,
So it's 8 games?
Pardon?
6 games, 7?
Oh, more than that, about 12 or 13. I can't remember exactly what it was, Johnny, but, it was as bad as the run on Big Ronnie's second spell. Ronnie had a really bad run of a record number of games without a win for the Glens. I think Mick probably managed, equalled that, but nobody could see then, where the hell do we go here?
Yeah.
Because you've got this fantastic squad of players now. At the same time, Conor McManaman got hurt, which didn't help. We lost to Coleraine that night, Glenafton that night. The following Friday night, we're down at Showgrounds Coleraine. We drew 0-0, I think it was. Somebody did Conor Mack, and then he came back too quickly. And the following week against Cliftonville, he went down, and that was him out for about 3 or 4 months. By the time he came back, Mick was away, and Rodney was in charge. But it was just this situation basically where any support base has got a limited tolerance level.
Yeah.
And I think that season, everybody was built up so much. And I wasn't on the board that stage, but I was still media officer, so I was still speaking to Mick after every match. So I was speaking to him during the week and that, But we were all built up so much that year that, I think it probably hit us so hard when we absolutely imploded, because it looked to me as if we were nailed on to win the league. Right, so Mick and everybody's got their own version of events. I wasn't involved, but it seems Mick had got that job lined up. As Mick would tell it, he had that job at Qatar lined up with Carlos Quiroz, who he'd worked with in various places. And from what I was told, Ali told me the same thing in the book, that they agreed he wasn't going until the end of the season. But then whenever it all went tits up that way, Mick eventually took the job earlier and went, and then Rodney took over, and with a good end of the season, got ourselves into Europe through the playoffs and that. Yeah. But there was an awful lot of really crazy things happened as well. I mean, the previous year, we got to the final of the playoffs. We'd never won the final of the playoffs. Every other time we'd been in it, we'd lost to Cliftonville at Solitude. They were a better team than us. But we got the final that year. We were 2-0 up. We had about 17 minutes to go. And then we gave away the most crazy penalty. Now it was a penalty, but they also sent Paddy McLean off, so we're down to 10 men, and then we gave away a second penalty, and it was 2 each. Roland Hill scored them both, and then extra time, he scored 2 more. So 17 minutes to go, you're sitting 2-0 up, feeling pretty comfortable about things. Extra time, you're 4-2 down by the end of it. Yeah. Now Mick goes into some detail in terms of how he felt of that night. He talks it through quite a lot. He's quite thorough about it, So you get that from Mick firsthand, and that I give it firsthand as a supporter. He was there that night watching it. It was just, I don't know. There's something. It's hard to describe this. There's something in the Glentoran DNA, which has been a challenge in the last 15 years or so. And I don't know what it is, Johnny. I don't know what's a confidence issue or what it is, but there's something there that we haven't overcome yet, and hence nearly being the title of the book. I mean, the first decade, we nearly won the clean sweep, which never done before. We then at the end of it nearly went bust. Yeah. Right? Then we nearly lost our ground at one stage. Like I say, the gates were locked by a vulture fund, and then having been taken over by Ali, we've nearly got back to where we wanted to be, but we're not quite there yet. It's just been a consistent 25 years of nearly getting to where you wanted to be.
Yeah.
And it's been a challenging 25 years. The one thing I would say about the Glens support kept going with it the whole time. I don't think
they've kept their standards supremely high.
They have. I don't think, Johnny, on the official attendance lists, I don't think we've a couple of years we've been top in the post-Ali era, but I don't think we've ever been any further down than second behind Linfield.
Yeah.
Right? On those years we were winning nothing. Linfield were winning everything. So it was a hell of an achievement to be that way. So we kept our support. It's actually incredible now to look at the number of young people following the Glens. Like I've commented in the book as well about when I was media officer. We had a lot of young people on the team. It's like David Kerr, for example, who's at Niffle now.
Fantastic
like
job.
Those guys, and David was phenomenal for the Glens, and he got that job up at Niffle on the back of what he did with us, and he deserved it. Yeah. He's fantastic. He's absolutely incredible. But David and other people who were working there in the media team, a lot of good young fellas and girls on that, they'd never really known a successful Glentoran team. Now, I'd only known relatively successful Glentoran teams up until the time I went away to live in England. So for those guys that come in and give what they gave to the club, And when we were losing, we weren't doing well. We're disappointing them year in, year out. That says a lot about that generation of Glentoran supporters. They're all still there, and they're growing in numbers, despite the fact that we haven't really delivered for them yet. So that says a lot about them.
What do you think is going to be the biggest difference going forward? Because the money's still there. Ali's sort of committed his future now after that interview recently and saying that he plans to be here. Obviously, he's completely disappointed that they never stepped over the line, beat Corn this year. But what do you think is the next step that has to be taken? Because we've talked about consistency. It was never there. It seems to have been there now. The club seems to be in a better place. Yes. Obviously, financially, it's in a much better place. What's next?
Well, I have a lot of time for Dackie. When he came to the club, they asked me to go and speak to him his first match down at Dungannon one day, because I sort of met him a couple of other times through different things previously. So I have a lot of time for Dackie. But what we need now, frankly, is stability. We have every single, I've been watching back just out of curiosity some nights, the 2021 season, 21-22 season, on YouTube, all the Glens matches. The turnover we've had in players, including since Dackie came in, has been phenomenal. Now, when Dackie came in, I'm sure he won't mind me telling you this, I was still media officer at that stage, and we lost up at Cliftonville one day, and I went in to get him to come out and do his interviews, and he was only there about maybe a fortnight. He was so utterly incandescent with the lack of effort he saw from his players. Now, he had the offload about 14 players that summer.
Yeah.
And some of those players, in Irish League terms, were, they were household names.
Yeah.
And they're all players. When we signed them, we were excited about that, Dackie had to do that, and he's had to bring his own lads in, and where I think it's going to be difficult to get the consistency that we all need, and I include Lauren, the Blues, and Coleraine in this. There's so many players now, Johnny, coming into the Irish League, who the careers on a downward trajectory, obviously. Because you come to the Irish League, you're not coming there as your first choice. If you've been a full-time professional all your career, and you're sitting maybe you're 25 or 26. You get a lot of these lads are coming over here, and if they do well, they're going to go back.
Yeah.
And if they don't do well, they're going to be away. We're now in a situation. Now look at this year, for example. We had two of our very best players this year were Connie Palmer, who was outstanding, and Ryan Cooney, who was in his first season with us. Now, Ryan Cooney was out of this world, and he's staying, as far as I know, right? But Tommy's away. Mm-hmm. Now, Tommy's away for what you have to say is the right reasons. He's been in the Irish League for 5 or 6 years now. 3 years with us, 3 years with Blues, I think it was. And he's way back to his family are all in Scotland.
Yeah.
It's where his upbringing was. So he's going home, basically. Nobody can begrudge Cammy that. We can begrudge him in the sense that we still want him in our midfield, but he's doing it for the right reasons. But we are now, the full-time clubs in the Irish League, we're now in a situation that the League of Ireland clubs have been in maybe for 15 or 20 years. When I was one of my last jobs before I retired, had me up in Donegal and up in the Derry Journal quite a lot. So I was speaking to guys who are very well connected at Finn Harbs and Derry City, and I was getting stories out of them. This is way before Ali came in and before we went full-time. And every year, the number of players they were turning over was phenomenal.
Yeah.
They're only able to sign players on 1-year contracts because ultimately they were signing players and didn't know whether they're any good or not.
Yeah.
Now that for Derry City was tough. I looked at it. I think Derry City brought in 10 new players at the start of this season. Now,
this year,
yeah. Yes. Now, considering what they brought in last year, really Liam Boyce, Gavin White, Carl Winchester, really top men. They brought in, the McLean brothers, but also brought in an awful lot more than that. But that's them every single year.
Yeah.
All League of Ireland clubs seem to be exactly the same. You're getting players coming to you, and they've maybe had, including loans, maybe 15 clubs over the last 10 years. The guys don't have any stability. It's not necessarily their fault. They don't have any stability, and they're coming here, somewhere they don't know, and they might fit in and love it and give you a long stretch, or they might go home. You just can't know. I mean, if we look at the likes of, what do you call him, Cody Lyons Foster, came in, the first half of the season, he was having to fill in at right back quite a lot at that stage because Johnny Russell, somebody, who it was, Aaron Whiteman would have been our first choice right back then. He was hurt. So he had to play right back for quite a while. But he then moved into central defence in the second half of the season, and he was absolutely outstanding for us. And he was away to Coleraine, right? Now, we can't turn around now and blame a player for leaving us for more money because we're getting them.
Yeah.
Because we're paying more money than a lot of other clubs, you know. And that's the way football is, Johnny. You know, it's the way it is everywhere, you know. And I've never really taken issue with players moving for money because why wouldn't they?
Well, it's a short
You know
time,
what I mean?
yeah.
Absolutely. You know, so Cody Lansfoster went to Coleraine then because they were the new guys paying the big money in the league. And you look at that, you have to say to yourself, like, where do you get stability from? Where do you get consistency from? You know, we haven't got, I mean, the Great Glens teams, ever since I was a kid, have had 3 or 4 lads there that maybe stayed 12, 13 years. In the case of Elliot Morris, Colin Nixon, Paul Lehman, people like that, it was a hell of a sight longer than that, you know. But you have that. The Great Blues teams all had that. You know, I was...
Athletic Brewing Company crafts award-winning non-alcoholic beers for those who want to be part of every round. With over 185 flavor awards, they're exceptional NA beers that fit your lifestyle and any social occasion. Summer's full of good times, and Athletic fits right in. Go to athleticbrewing.com to have brews delivered to your door, or find them at a bar, restaurant, or store near you. Near beer. Athletic Brewing Company. Fit for all times.
Then again, not only has times changed, but it's so inconsistent that you're not winning anymore.
Yeah.
So you're not going to stay. People chase money, people chase silverware.
Yes.
And back in those days, Glens are winning league cups or leagues, whatever.
Yep.
Linfield are doing the exact same. So the majority of the players don't want to leave because they're in the best team. They're probably getting the best money and they're also getting success.
Yes.
Oh, when that leaves, people want to go.
Well, I was out the other day, I was having a drink with a mate. He's a lifelong friend of mine, he's a blue man. And we're talking, I was saying to him that if you give me any Linfield team from team picture from about 1970 up until about 7 or 8 years ago, I said, Linfield teams, like not our ones, I could tell you virtually every player in those teams. He was saying he'd be the same with the Glens, but I wouldn't recognise, basically go past Kirk Miller, Jimmy Mulgrew, Chris Shields, I wouldn't recognise very many players to that Linfield team now.
Yeah.
You know, and the Blue Men, I would say, wouldn't recognise enough of the players in our team now because the turnover is so high. You know, like, that is not the fault of managers specifically. It's just that's the world we're operating in.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a difficult world to operate in, Johnny. You know, and the players, like, I remember 10 years ago, and things were going badly at the Glens. There was players like, you know, Colin Burney and Willie Garrett coming through into the Glens team. But there was no senior players there to help them
mature,
develop. They just weren't there, you know. And then towards the very end of it, just before Mick and Wendy came in, Gary Smith brought Gavin Pearce in. Like, Pearce had won everything and was the one down the south of Ireland. He was fantastic.
Mountain, wasn't he?
Oh, he was fantastic. Fantastic defender, but a fantastic guy as well, you know. And Willie and Callum and people like that were coming near the end of their term at the Oval at that stage, you know. But they both said the difference he made playing beside them. You know, I remember seeing, I'll not name him, but about maybe 2013, 14, or that period, one of our defenders getting sent off against Ards down at Clonnyboy Park. I mean, he did a foul, double, 2 bookings, you know. But he was young, and he was kind of obviously devastated about it. But he had to walk across the pitch when you were allowed to walk across the pitch when you were sent off. And nobody, not one, there wasn't one senior player in the team with the experience to come over and put their arm around him.
Right, okay.
You know, and I looked at that and I thought to myself, I can't be good for him. Like, I'm thinking of the lads that came through the ranks, you know, like Gary Smith, people like that, you know, John Devine. When they came into the team, they were coming in as young fellas, but they were coming in beside very, very good, experienced players who could talk them through it. These lads weren't. And the pressure they were under was immense, you know, but there was nobody there to back them up.
Yeah.
You know, and that was that's, again, it's nobody's fault. I mean,
well, do you think the game's got more selfish? Do you think that's why?
I don't know. No, because like the lads we brought in, you know, I'm saying about bringing players in from League of Ireland, right? But in the early days, well, just before the takeover, we brought Pearsey in. Now, in Mick's first January window, he brought in a big lad, Keith Cowan. Don't know if you ever played against Keith.
Like a big surfer, like 6'4", he looked like a Australian guy.
Big fella.
Obviously he wasn't, but
career at Finn Harps. He was from Letterkenny, right? I went up, he was general manager, and I went up in the cup final against Ballymena in 2000. Keith had played about maybe 7 or 8 games at the most for the Glens at that stage, but Pearsey was hurt, so Keith got starting the final beside Paddy McLean. And I went in what was passing for the change room, one of the lounges up there, and basically Keith was just absolutely letting everybody.
Right.
He was brilliant to listen to. Big lad hadn't played many games for us, but he never won the League of the Cup in the Republic. So it's going to be Keith's first big trophy.
Yeah.
My God, he was going to win it. You know what I mean? And he was really, really giving them that level of leadership that you love to see. Pearsley, I think, from what people tell me, had been like that the whole of the season up until he got injured. And you get guys like that, they still exist, but they're harder and harder to get.
Yeah.
Even I was looking last week. They were saying that basically at Ibrox, the manager there, Danny Rule, was shouting at the owner, "Get me some leaders, get me some leaders." Well, I think we're all saying that, but where the hell do you get them? Linfield had Chris Shields, and he missed most of this season. You saw what that happened, the result of that. They've still got Jamie Mulgrew, who's still a fantastic footballer. But Jamie can't start every week for the Blues.
No.
So they lost Shields and have sort of lost Jamie. Right. But those two boys got the Blues over the line so often, just with their attitude.
Yeah.
And great Glentoran players like Leaper, and one of my mates was saying to me yesterday about the famous Morgan Day. He was saying that the big difference that day, okay, the goal was what made the difference because we won the game. But he says basically in the second half, Paul Lehman just took complete control as captain and just drove them on. I wasn't there that day, I was living in Scotland, but he was saying that about him. I think that's what those sort of guys do.
Yeah.
We've always had them, the Blues have always had them. When Big Ronnie was at the Ports, he had them. The Lauren, I think, for the first few years anyway, they had them too.
Yeah.
And Cosgrove seems to be one of them at Lauren,
Yeah.
So when you've got boys like that, you'll get somewhere. They're just very, very hard to get.
In terms of those people being at Glentoran at the minute, who would you sort of pick out of the lineup to say that, obviously Marcus Kane's there, he's been there for a long time, probably knows the club inside out.
Yes.
He would be one of your leaders.
Oh, Marcus is, absolutely. And funny enough, even going back to when Paddy McLean wasn't at the club long, Paddy gave an interview, I think it was the Derry Journal maybe, and the Derry Journal asked him who was the best player at the club. He says the most important man at the club is the skipper, Marcus Kane. And Marcus was and still is.
Right, show, yeah.
But since Marcus moved in a couple of years ago, since Marcus moved to centre half, he's been phenomenal. Marcus is also a very good left back, and he's a very good left winger as well. For us, that's where he played most of his career, But Marcus at centre half has been absolutely incredible. But we've lost leaders as well. Paddy McLean, you'd agree, would have been one of them. But Paddy went, and he's up at Derry now, where I think's probably where he's been at his happiest. You know, it's difficult to say. I really don't know because, again, we went out with a relatively new team this year, and I'm sure when Decky he's brought in players like he I've spoken to him. He gets it. He brought in Ross Clarke and Charlie O'Rourke, in the January window there. Now, they're unlucky with injuries, but I'm quite sure they were brought in to get us over the line because they've done it before. They know the league. They're both very, very good players. Yeah. Ross Clarke's tortured us so often. Charlie O'Rourke, when he was playing at Dungannon, never mind the Cruise, was always a great player against us. James Singleton is a leader.
Yeah.
An absolute leader in that team. And you can see the difference he makes. No matter where you play him, I think he's a very, very good player, right? But I think Singo's value goes beyond his playing ability.
It's first
because he's out there, he's a leader, an absolute leader, all around the club. And I think we've got 2 or 3 of those lads, but they haven't. Marcus and Singo, it's not their fault, but they haven't got any experience of getting the club over the line, win the league.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because Marcus has been with us the whole time, and Singo's at a club that won a couple of Irish Cups, got the Europe a few times, but Glenavon were never going to win the league in that era when Crusaders, the Blues and the Reds were so strong. But they got a couple of second place finishes, so people like Singo and Marcus are very, very important. Because Cammy Palmer was this year, but obviously we've lost Cammy now, I don't know what. I think Pat Hoban probably brings something.
Well, but say the boys who came from down south, if you look at the likes of Pat, who's had a phenomenal season, probably one of the best in a long, long time. You've Aaron McAniff's came in this centre midfield, he signed. You have, as you touched on, you've Ross, you've Jardy who's signed, load of experience, knows Jardy's hurt his foot. But you have brought 6 or 7 in that sort of small window.
Well, Ryan Cooney in the previous window is pretty much the same. Ryan Cooney's good. I think he's got more assists than anybody else in the league.
But then again, you're talking about consistency. Like the likes of Danny Amos has just left. He was one of your top, most consistent people coming from the left-hand side. Goals, assists.
Yeah.
There's somebody who you would think the club would want to hold on to. But what's the main reasoning behind? Is it a playing again? Is he going to stay in the Irish League? Is he just going to go to the club?
I haven't spoken to anybody about that, so I don't know.
Okay.
Right. I think this year, I think there's probably people were a bit hard. Look, Danny Amos did not do as well this season, did in his first season, right? Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of players at the Glens over the years have had the second season syndrome. A lot of players at most clubs have had the second season syndrome. You know, he didn't have as good a season this time as he did last time. I don't know what his attitude's like. I don't know the guy at all. You know, so he's been let go because you obviously feel with Charlie O'Rourke and that, you know, that they'll probably get through that. So with Charlie O'Rourke, and you've also got Singo, like, let's face it, he's standing left back. Yeah. If you have to play him there, you know. So I don't know, maybe, but I don't know about Danny. Whether Danny wanted to go or what the situation is. But I know he signed for a 1-year contract and he was very quick to sign his second year. Last year he was, you know, so I don't honestly know, you know, on that one. Because you can't. I mean, Danny came in, I think, because Johnny Russell took ill at the start of last season and looked like he was quite seriously ill. So Johnny lost his place because he wasn't well. Danny had to come in there and to give Decky what he needed in the team. So Johnny suffered as a result of that, but he got his move away, which has gone well for him, you know, because Johnny's a smashing footballer, you know. So it's difficult to say where they are, and I wouldn't want to second guess what anybody else is doing, what they think. Because I genuinely don't know at the minute, Johnny.
No,
you know?
100%. In terms of where we're sitting now, obviously the book's in the position where it's here and people can obviously take it and read it and go back through the history in the last sort of 25 years. What do you see Glentoran doing in the next 25 years?
Well, I think, you know, a lot of it depends.
Can't go 50 years without winning the league, can you?
No, we'll not. We won't. We just won't, right? I have not yet reconciled myself to not seeing the Glens win the league in my lifetime, right? Okay. So I have not reconciled myself to that. A couple of mates might have, but I haven't just got there yet. No, it's difficult to say. We don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, we're lucky enough that whatever else has gone wrong in the last few years, as you said yourself, Ali Poor has consistently supported 4 different managers now. Yeah. With funds. Like even in the January window there, I mean, to support Decky the way he did in the January window, and you'd hope that some of the lads that come in, especially when lads come up from the Republic, you know, there's very few lads come up from the Republic in the January window and fly. If they're going to do well, it does tend to be the next year when you see the best of them, you know, because they haven't been in season when they joined us. Yeah. You know, I would say Keith Cowan and Pearsley were probably the 2 that did it. Most of them don't. You know, Cliftonville seem to sign lads from the south every January, and it doesn't seem to make a big difference to them, you know, because of the contacts there and whatever, scouts, whatever. So I'm not too worried about that. I don't honestly know. It'll depend we're not a million miles away from it, because I think between us, Lauren, and Coleraine, and even the Blues this season, like ultimately when you look at it, there wasn't a lot between us. You know, the big problem we had this season was quite simply our results against Lauren. Yeah. You know, results against Coleraine up until that game at the end of the season were really good. You know, results against the Blues in the league was basically, I think, a win each and 2 draws. You know, so you were all right. But Lauren, we haven't beaten Lauren in 90 minutes really for about 4 years now. I think Mick was still the manager the last time we did it. You know, we beat them 4-0 at the Oval. Yeah. And that phenomenal run we were having with Conor Mack and Jay Donnelly being so good. You know, so I don't think we beat Lauren since then. We have a monkey to get off our back with Lauren, which we can do. Right? Yes. And I mean, I won't sugarcoat it. Some refereeing decisions we had against Lauren this year were absolutely mad. They really were mad. You know, if it had been happening in Scotland, you wouldn't be, you still be hearing about it. Yeah. You know, but we just have to get this. But like the Cruise, we didn't win at Seaview for about 11 or 12 years. Didn't win at Coleraine for a maybe similar length of time. Once we did that, it was okay. Going to Coleraine and going to Cruise didn't really cause you much of a thought. You were going there and you had a game on your hands, but you'd have reasonable confidence you could win it if you played well. Yeah. We need to get over that psychological barrier about Lauren, you know, which I don't really understand, because like Lauren were champions. They won the championship this year. They deserve it. Completely deserve it, right? Because they got more points than anybody else, you know, and they won the games they had to win. But like, you know, I don't know, some of our guys maybe have got a thing now about basically decisions you get given against you down there, because we had some awful decisions given against us, not just down there, but at the Oval as well, you know. But if we can overcome that, then we're in the mix. We're well in the mix. You know, I don't know what Coleraine are going to do this summer. Yeah. Who they're going to bring in, who they're not going to bring in. I don't know who Lauren are going to bring in. I don't know who we're going to bring in. I've heard very, very little in terms of rumours down about the Oval, and I'm happy with that. Okay. I'd rather it was that way, you know, that you just announce them when you've got them. So I don't know. But the bottom line is, the important thing is, we're the top 3. And since we had the takeover, I think the 7 years, I think I've been 3rd, I think 4 of the years. And 4th once and 5th twice. I think that's been it, you know. Now, it's not good enough. Need to be ahead of that. But we're consistently in the top 3 now. So we have just got to find a way. Daggy's got to find a way. Wendy's got to find a way, basically in terms of recruitment and in terms of bringing other players through. They've got to find a way just to overcome that hoodoo we've got with Lauren. And then that'll make us completely competitive.
Do you think that's the one issue that you have?
Oh, no, God, no. It's not the one issue.
Well, the main.
It's a big, big issue for us.
Yeah.
It really is a big issue. Even that night, like I say, it was many years ago was it? 3 years ago, that match, or 4 years ago, that match in the playoff, the 4-2 game was sent to you about Ronan Hale got the 4. That ever since then, we've had this thing about them.
Yeah.
And clubs have that. Clubs do have that. When I was younger, I remember Linfield, some of the best Linfield teams you'd seen. Bangor seemed to beat them quite a lot.
Yeah.
Now Lauren are a bit different kettle of fish from Bangor. What Lauren have done as well, which none of the other teams have done since they've gone full time, is they have at least some stability in the changing room. Like Thomas Cosgrove's been there for quite a long time. There's 2 of the other ones, what do you call him? Randall. Has been there quite a while. Yeah. There's been a bit of consistency. All those lads were playing for Lauren when you were playing with them. So there's been consistency that we probably haven't had apart from Marcus.
Yeah.
Really. So I don't know what we'll have to do, and I'm not paid to know what we'll have to do. So I'm glad I can say that, Johnny, But as a supporter, I think we've got to get rid of this, I don't know, whether it's inferiority complex, whether it's an insecurity or whatever. We've got to have a confidence to drive on. And I think from that point of view, we could do having a couple of lads who've got over the line.
Yeah.
In the league. Now, we have in the south. I think, Aaron McAniff has won the league down south. Mm-hmm. Pat Hoobin's won the league down south. Now, different league, and they're 2 of our older players now. So what do we like next season? It might be a season too far for Pat. I don't know. I hope it isn't. And I think that with the goal scoring ability he's got, I would think we should be all right there. Yeah. But we just have to get lads in who know this league and they can get us over the line in this league. And once you do it once, I think, honestly, you see in Mick's era, I actually think the turning point in Mick's era was that night where you got the winner down at Lauren, you did your knee, and Hervoy Plum did his knee the same night. Now we hadn't lost to Lauren since it came up, I think, at that stage. Mm-hmm. And this is not the Lauren hoodoo I'm talking about here, but that night, the number of games that season that Hervoy Plum had opened the scoring for the Glens, or won either with a brilliant free kick, more often than not with a brilliant free kick.
Yeah, it was fabulous, yeah.
But also with a great goal, right? Hervoy was out for a year after that. That lost us something unique to us at that stage. Like, everybody could claim that about their team from time to time, right? But with Hervoy, it was happening. He scored about 14 or 15 games or goals that season.
Free kicks.
And it was only January when he got hurt. But we were with confidence at that stage. We're playing a lot of confidence. That night that Paddy McLean, the same season when Paddy got the overhead kick in the last minute, they're in Inver Park to win the game for us. That's how it was going for them. We were on something like a 15 or 16 game unbeaten run that night until that Lauren, and then you got the winner in the last minute and got injured getting it. Hervoy got injured earlier than you, but that was a turning point for us, and I don't think the Glens, apart from that half a season, I don't think the Glens played at the same level of confidence at the end.
Yeah.
But there's other things dealt with in here, like there was the whole Joe Crow situation, if you remember when we were knocked out of the cup after beating Newry City, in the cup and semi-final, not first. And we got through the cup quarter-finals that year, and then we found out that Joe Crow was ineligible because he had played for the seconds in an intermediate cup game. Right. Now, that was horrible. I mean, that day I was sitting up, and I was still media officer at the time, and I wasn't general manager. I'd finished all that by that stage, but I was still media officer. And I went up, I was sitting up in the stand, and a couple of journalists phoned me during the second half and said to me, right, we're being told Joe Crow was ineligible for this game. We won 1-0. We didn't exactly romp it against Newry Town, but we did win it. And I had to go down after the match, and Mick Davis was in the book. I had to go in to Mick and say, Mick, could you come out here a minute? And Mick wasn't always the best to approach. Yeah. Immediately after a game, he's, what do you want? I said, Nick, come here, out. He said, no, you can sit in front of these. I said, Mick, I can't come out here. So I take Mick into the physiotherapist's office and tell him that I'd just been told that Joe Crow might be ineligible if he was being kicked out of the cup. Now, see, at that stage, we were top of the league.
Yeah.
Right? And that knocked the stuffing out of our team. Now, you can look at it and say, it shouldn't have done, because what's also dealt with in here is the year that we had all 12 points docked off us because of Andy Kilmartin, but went on to win the league anyway. by more than 12 points because we got the points back. But that team had the experience and the aggression to get ourselves through that.
Yeah.
That team, the Joe Crow year, clearly didn't, you know. And that was the year, I think, that was the year of the playoff game against Larne at the Oval. But, you know, things like that come along. Now, that wasn't the manager's fault. You know, my understanding from Mick and from within the club is that he asked somebody who should know.
Yeah.
Is Joe Crow right for this game?
Their job.
And he was told, yes, he is. So once the manager's told that, that should be the end of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so Mick was told that, he played him. But when I went down to see him that night, he was devastated.
I'm sure.
Because he had to go out and deal with the press. What I didn't want was for one of them to ambush him with this. When he didn't know, and the BBC they asked him, and to see his face whenever he found out, you know, because he didn't deserve that. You know, but those are the things that make nearly, you know, an issue. Like we go through the semi-final of that, would have been playing Ballymena, you know, who had beaten a couple of years before in the final. And we think we're a better team than Ballymena then. So, you know, you'd have fancied yourself getting into the final against, I think it was a Cruise that year, 2002, was that the year you were playing for the Cruise in the final?
Can't remember.
It was one of those years anyway. I think a Cruise won it twice in a row, didn't it? So it was basically, you played the Cruise or Linfield in the final, so you'd have fancied your chances.
Yeah.
But we lost out that day. And then in the league, which it just knocked something out of us. It really did, you know. But those are the sort of things that you know, football deals you.
Yeah.
You know, and most clubs could probably come up with examples themselves that have cost them, like the time that Carrick stayed up against Warren Point and the controversial decisions there. There was a night that Coleraine were playing at Solitude in the playoff final.
The penalty thing. Remember, it was over the line, yeah.
And that, I think that cost Rodney his job, basically.
Yeah.
You know, because it would have been Europe, you know, and he only was there the one season. Everybody can point to those things that happened to them. But when it's your own team, it sticks with you.
Yeah. One of the things I want to ask you just before we move on is your time as a general manager is one of the things that interests me the most. It's a job and it's an area where I find extremely interesting. Something I would love to do myself because you kind of have full control over the club in a way where you know everything that goes on. You're at the helm of it all, finances, money, academies, the whole heap. What was the biggest problems that you faced going into Glentoran as a general manager?
Well, funny, I'll tell you the positive side of it first, Johnny. The positive side of it, there wasn't a lot of us there. I just said, like, I was in there on, you know, on buttons. I was retired, you know.
Yeah.
I lived off a pension. So I just wanted to go and help them. And when they and Mick came and asked me what to do it, you know, and so I went in to do it with them. You know, at that stage it was me. I was in there 3 days a week I was in. Although, like, it didn't just end when you weren't in the Oval, like nights, everything, you were, it was dominating. Ricky Ray, who was the secretary, had been a long-standing secretary. Ricky was still there at the time. And there was Mick. And basically that was it. It was me and Mick and Ricky. You know, and I must say, I loved it. I really did love doing it for most of the 2 years I was doing it. But you also, when you've got the manager, is also effectively the chairman of the club.
Yes.
And also effectively the CEO of the club.
Yes.
You know, that's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think, and the pressure, I've said this in the book as well, like, people have got their own view about Mick. People who don't know him have got their own view of Mick. Mick and I probably, I'll tell you this for a fact. I was the only one in there who used to have rows with Mick, because I would, you know, fight the bit out with him if I thought he was wrong. You know, whereas other people, basically, if Mick was to give off to him, they would just basically take it and skulk away, you know. But the upside of that is I could see the amount of pressure he put himself under doing that job. I mean, the one thing is, people say, oh, it was a plaything for him. It wasn't, Johnny.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't work out for his manager ultimately, but like he wasn't playing on it down there. You know, the guy put himself through an awful lot.
I don't think anybody would go into that job to have a bit of fun.
No.
He's a manager at the end of the day, do you know what I mean? He wants to be successful.
Well, you saw what he did in one season at Co-Bramblers, where he didn't have all that. You know, he got them into the playoffs. Yeah. You know, and then he left before the playoffs for reasons he'd probably better tell you. Yeah. You know, but you know, like Mick worked very, very hard in that club, you know. And I remember one night, you know, I was on the phone with Mick, and it was about the time, I think that's the year we played Larne in the cup, in the Carnarvon Field final. And there was a lot of controversy about Mick didn't want to play it at Seaview on the Tuesday night. We were due back there on the Friday night. He was right. Things, but he was right, but he was being too public about it. I felt at the time, you know, but he was in the right. But that night I was in the house and he was on the phone to me, and my younger son Ben, he's Glen, my boys are both Glen men as well. My younger son Ben went in his wife Jenny and says to him, "God, Dad's on there with McDermott, and they're effing and blind at each other. You want to hear it? It's wild, And that was fine. But Jenny says to me, "What's he like?" I says, "All right." Now, when I was working in newspapers, I was largely in the commercial advertising side. I was in charge of that, and I said, "Well, do you remember when I was in the Glasgow Herald, and I was responsible for every penny that came into the company? The pressure I used to find myself under, the pressure I used to put myself under." She says, "I do indeed." I says, "Well, Mick has that. The difference is there was nobody coming into my office and booing me."
Yeah.
If I had a bad day, I wouldn't be walking down Socky Hall Street in Glasgow and people call me a useless bollocks, things like But, Mick, the managers have to put up with that. And it's only when you actually get involved in the club or any club that you really see what managers have to go through. I like everybody else, when I was younger, and right up until I got involved in the club, I'd have been as harsh as anybody on managers and players. I would have been, Johnny, because I didn't know enough about what went on. And so it's perfectly natural and perfectly normal for supporters to be hard on managers and players because they don't know what's going on. When I went in there, long before Mick, probably with Gary, plus an incident I saw with Alan Kernan during his brief period at the club, probably but with Gary in particular, I could see what they were going through, and I thought to myself, this just changes my attitude completely. Yeah. That's not to say everybody who comes in is a great manager. It's not to say everybody who comes in is the right man for the job.
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't. But when you see what they actually put themselves through and how hard they have to work, you look at football differently. You really do, And that's why it's probably better if most supporters don't know the players or don't know the manager, because it would only, it would take something away from you as a supporter. Yeah. Because going along and shouting at your team is one of the joys in life for people.
That's what they're paying for, isn't it? Fans are allowed to have their opinions. And
Absolutely. I mean, people say our supporters are the worst. They're not. They've had more to be angry about in the last 15 years than most other ones do. Yes. But I see what Healy gets. What David Healy gets up there is absolutely unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Now, I would never want to second guess how Blue Men or supporters of any other club should feel. But I look at it and think, oh God, if David Healy was delivering that for us, how would we feel? And then you're thinking, you'd probably be the same after it's a bad year. It's the natural state of things. And certain people in the media and that have given us a harder time. Yeah. But our supporters a harder time. But they don't deserve it, Johnny. I mean, they've gone on year in and year out, they have gone along. Yeah. And I remember one thing, and it was quite early on, one thing that convinced me that saw the stress managers put themselves under. Or we won a game one day early in the season, and it was 1-0 against somebody. And in those days I used to go and get the managers down for their interviews after a match, and this manager came down, and I could see the relief in him. He was hyper, and I'm thinking, well, 1-0, it's an early season game, would expect to, but it was something massive had lifted off his shoulder, and you could see it in him. And I thought to myself, Jesus Christ, how do anybody want to do that job? Yeah. If it's affecting you that way, that's football. So I don't know.
Inconsistent. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't know how long you've got. No. So to put yourself under all that detriment near enough for potentially a year, potentially 2 years.
Look at Tiernan Lindsay. He left Larne to go to Derry City. He left Larne on a high, right? Group stages of whatever European trophy it was. On a real high, won the league twice. He's gone up there, right? Now, I couldn't comment for a minute on how he's doing up there, who's to blame for where they are in the league at the moment. But, Tiernan is feeling very different from what he felt 3 years ago. Absolutely. At Inver Park. Mm-hmm. I don't know who's right and who's wrong. And to be honest with you, it's none of my business. But I'm curious. I look at the League of Ireland highlights on YouTube on a Friday night, because we have a few ex-players playing that league. But, how must he feel?
But then again, it's a completely different league. Yeah. And if he doesn't go and challenge himself, as much as everybody has their own opinions on how Derry are doing, and if anything, I probably took more attention to Derry since Tiernan's left. Yes. Him and Seamus and Andy Mitchell going down there to kind of see how things are going to materialise. Yeah. And they do well, like last year. Bring a lot of players in, as you say, but it's a completely different league.
Well, I like to see how Paddy does for him, Paddy McLean. Yeah. Because Paddy was a good player for us for a lot of years. A really good player for a lot of years. With 6 years he was with us. Paddy was a good player for the Glens. He was even an iconic figure. Yeah. In a way, I like to see how he's doing. But you're right, it's a completely different league. Daddy coming to us is slightly different because he played for all the time and he played for us. So he was a Glens player. He understands the Glens, understands what's expected at the Glens, and he still knew a lot of people when he came back to the club. You know, so that he's different. But you know, what he's showed is he wants Irish League players into that squad if he can get them. But they're getting harder and harder to get because, you know, unless you can get a career break or something like that, you know, it's difficult to see the justification. When you hear about certain clubs, certain part-time clubs now, and the money either they're paying or they're about to start paying. Like if you've got a decent job and somebody comes at you offering you a few £100 a week, you know, why would you go pro?
Yeah.
You know,
well, this is the thing too. Then at what stage does it become the opposite? If you want to go full time, when does £1,000 a week become normal?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because most people probably earn £35,000 to £40,000 a year.
Absolutely.
So for you to park the bus and go, I'm going to go here for an extra X, Y, and Z.
Well, you're living in a country where the minimum wage is probably about 26 grand now.
Yes, 100%.
You know, if the minimum wage is sitting about 26 grand, you're going to have to pay way over the odds, way over that, to get a player to go part time. You know, now that's what you want to do, and if we've got Ali's prepared to do that,
absolutely,
the guy Cole Rain's prepared to do that. The Kenny Bruce was prepared to do that. You know,
it takes having the benefactor who wants to commit to the future of the club. Absolutely. But then again, also then when you look at the stresses and the potential infringements that clubs have, when you look at the Glens, massive club, fans dictating, wanting success. Tiernan's the same. Yeah. Tiernan's going to Derry. Derry are a massive club paying out a lot of money, but he's never had the pressure.
Yes.
Tiernan went to Larne, took him off from the championship, and was able to build the team gradually.
That was the adventure.
It was.
Larne. Yeah.
So the difference is then Tiernan's whole thing was building it back into this team, and Gary's obviously taking it and been successful.
Yeah.
Derry's probably a whole different kettle of fish.
Well, you bring in, you know, Liam Boyce, Gavin White, James McLean, Carl Winchester, the lads they brought in.
Phenomenal footballers.
They're entitled to expect results.
Yeah.
You know, now whether or not they're in all those boys are in the right frame of mind, now to be playing in the League of Ireland, I don't know. I really don't, you know. But I mean, like, they're entitled to expect it. Like, and their own, like, I think their owner's the richest guy in Northern Ireland now, isn't he? You know, I mean, he's made a phenomenal amount of money. So he's obviously pumping money into the club, including their stadium. You know, he's done a lot for them. But, you know, it's just, that's the thing. As my mate always says, is you support a big club, your expectations are different from support a small club. It's as simple as that, and nobody can do anything about that, Johnny. That's the way life is. It's what puts pressure on Glentoran managers, Glentoran boards. That's what puts the pressure on them. You know, but would you rather would you rather be a team where nothing's expected of you?
No, you'd want to be that team who's demanding.
I mean, you asked me where we have finished up, right? I've had Ali not come in. Well, the term I always used, basically, I made it up, right? It was the Evertonisation of Glentoran. Where are we going to become Everton? You know, and I can remember Everton winning the league 5 or 6 times. You know, and they were a top club. But Everton aren't a top, maybe a top club now, but they're not one of the big clubs anymore. Yeah. When the what do you call it? When the Premier League was introduced, the Big Five included Everton, the Big Five clubs that pushed for that. You know, now I worried about that. Are we going to become Everton? As an Arsenal supporter, up until 2 or 3 years ago, I was really starting to worry about Arsenal becoming an Everton. You know, and no harm, I know a few Everton supporters, so it's like just an example, but that's what I worried about with the Glens, because there's enough Everton supporters there who can remember Everton being good to still be angry at where they are now.
In terms of the investment, so Ali's obviously a part of Glentoran. Massive part. Without Ali, Glentoran probably, as you say, ceased to exist.
Oh, yeah.
If Ali doesn't commit his future to the Glens, do you see somebody else coming in to take over that investment?
Johnny, I have no idea, but what I would look at and say, okay, somebody took over from Kenny Bruce. You know, when Kenny left, you know, but the reality is, in the years I was on the board before Ali took over, there was no big queue of them coming in. Now, there's other clubs would say they turned Ali down. Now, Ali and Mick have told very different stories in the book about that, you know, about other clubs turning them down. There's 2 other clubs in their minds. You know, there was Glenavon because Wendy was there, and there was the Reds because the Reds have seen his potential as well. But, you know, the consensus was they were turned down. They turned the boys down. That's not how Mick or Ali or Wendy, they've all been interviewed for that book. It's not how they tell it. Now, what you have to say about Ali is, you know, like, you can criticise the actual internal run of the club, right? And it's legitimate to criticise that if you want to. But in 7 years, he's still been pumping money in. Big money, right? And then he went on live for Glentoran TV a couple of weeks ago to say he was going to keep doing it. You know, like, what can you say about that?
Yeah.
You know, you can't say anything other than thank God he's doing it.
Absolutely.
Because if you had pulled it after a couple of seasons, where were we?
Yeah.
Because you're not, the thing about it is, Johnny, you're not going back to square one. Because the generation of people, all the people who were volunteers 10 years ago, who were raising money for the club and that sort of thing, they're all 10 years older.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they've all either fallen out with the club or they've been pushed out or they've just got too old to do it. You know, it's a perfectly natural thing to happen. You know, so you're not going back to square one. All the guys who kept the club going 10 years ago, they're not just there to step back in again. So if Ali wasn't there, you don't know where you'd go. So we just have to work on the basis that we take it seriously, that he's done so much for us and he's still determined to make a success of it. And unless we think that way, we're going to panic ourselves.
Yeah. In terms of that, you just made a comment there in regards to the club.
Yeah.
And obviously internal issues.
Yeah.
What internal issues still exist for Glentoran, and what needs to improve to make that club more, I can't say self-sustainable because the money that goes in is probably astronomical. Yeah. But the same as Lauren, there's been foundations put in place for quite a long time for them to be successful.
Yes.
Does Glentoran need a copy of that?
Well, I think Glentoran is trying to copy that now. It didn't then. Like I say, for the first few years, it was me, Mick and Ricky. Yeah. That was it. You know, now having said that, we're just as successful then as we are now.
Yeah.
You know, but, you know, I think they're trying to copy that now. And they've got some good people working in there behind the scenes in the club. There are some good people in the office. It's just, you know, it's difficult to say because I'm not in there very often any longer, you know, and I'm not seeing what goes on day to day. But I do see some of the people, like, and they're good people. You know, Leanne, who's the operations manager, I actually was a person that recruited her 3 years ago. There's Ross, who you probably knew at Lauren. Ross is in there now, based in commercial manager. And there's Joe, who handles the football side of it for the secretary. They're knocking their pan in. They're working really, really hard. You know, but you have to be careful about allowing too much to be farmed out to people who don't have the affinity with the club the same way.
Yeah.
You know, because if you do, and it's any club, Johnny, you know, if you do too much of that, you know, you basically find the club loses a wee bit of momentum. Like, fortunately, the ones we've got in there, like I say, there's none of them I would have a bad word for. Because I see the amount of work they do and I can see how the difference it actually makes. So the criticisms I would have had about the structure of the club, to a large degree, they're being dealt with. Yeah. But maybe we did it too late at the wrong end of this. You know, Lauren went in there, and I don't know. I mean, I think Kenny being here a lot maybe made a difference as well, because Kenny knows Lauren. Whereas when Ali was trusting those of us that were put in there at that stage, you know. But I think, you know, like I say, Lauren have benefited from the structures Kenny put in place at the time. And those structures were probably in place when you were there, Johnny, as a player, you know. We didn't have those structures. And the Glens, I think, are trying to put those structures in now. So all I can do is hope that it keeps growing and keeps evolving probably that way. Because if it does, then, you know, that's something less for people to have to worry about.
For you, what's next? Is there another book on the cards? Are we going to go back into the general manager's role? Are we getting back in the club?
I don't think, no, I wouldn't do that, because to be honest with you, I think I'm probably too old now to be doing that. I mean, I retired for health reasons a few years ago, and then I've had other health issues, so I wouldn't do that. Like, I've told them I'll help them any way they want, and I do. You know, I do help them in various ways, but that's as much as I really need to do now, Johnny. I quit the board in 2002, because I reckon at that stage, you know, when those three of us were on as representatives of effectively of the shareholders, you know, the original shareholders of the old club, you know, but you're in there. I found I was in there, and a lot of legal responsibilities as director, but I didn't know enough of what was going on. Now, that's not to say I didn't trust people or distrusted people, something, but I didn't feel comfortable with that, you know. So I was, plus, like, I did get diagnosed a couple of months later, so I was happy enough to be away from it. But from my point of view, obviously I'm still following them. I'm thinking about maybe the next book, doing our book, about the 80s, maybe in the 90s. Because the 80s was a phenomenal decade for the Glens. You know, people look back on the 80s with so much love, you know, for a big Ronnie McFall's team, Jimmy Cleary, Gary Blackledge, who's my favourite player ever, you know, Barney Bars, Raymond Morrison, Gary McCartney, so many of these boys, you know. But in that era, we won the Cup, I think, 6 times. We won the league twice. The Blues won the league 8 times. So the big question to be asked, and I've done this with Jimmy Cleary and people like this before, what was the reason for that? you know, this was a fantastic decade. We've got a good cup final day out pretty much every year. We won it pretty much every year. You know, it couldn't have been better. But, you know, still, I still think the looking over your shoulder at Linfield thing was still very much, an issue back then. But that's the Glens.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you,
It's been an absolute pleasure. We finish on hugs.
Yeah.
As always, so off we get. I thank
Wait,
you
I don't
for
with this mount here.
coming in and
All the best. Thanks very much.
giving me your time.
Not at
And
all.
as you say, nearly.
Yeah.
Another year of nearly.
Yeah. Well, maybe this year won't.
Maybe this year we won't.
We'll keep them crossed anyway.
But yes, absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of On the Spot Football Podcast. Nearly for the Glentoran. Can they do it next year? Will there be another book? Who knows? Join us next week. See you soon.